what's your analysis of the aid distribution to Gaza? This seems to be the most controversial issue at the moment.
Yeah, let's take the tactical stuff aside and we'll come back to that. I think if we look at the strategy behind it, it makes a lot of sense, because if your objective as a military campaign is to essentially dismantle Hamas, to remove their administrative functions, remove their ability to attack Israel in future, remove their ability to control the Gaza Strip, you have to attack their levers of control. And the biggest lever of control they've had this war is aid, where significant percentages of it have been diverted to Hamas, where they've used it to pay, sell it and pay their soldiers, where they've used it as a mechanism to control the people of Gaza. So at a strategic level, it makes perfect sense to try and separate the people of Gaza from Hamas. And that actually goes back to the same counterinsurgency strategy that we in the West use. I mean, it's not been hugely successful in recent years, but the underpinning ethos behind it is that you separate the insurgent from the people.
How on earth do you do that in Gaza?
And exactly, and that's been part of the trouble the IDF have had, I think, for the last, 21 months, is that there's nowhere for the people to go. And even if they move to the humanitarian zones, Hamas can move with them. And that's why we've seen strikes in humanitarian zones in Gaza, because Hamas go there too. Of course they do. When your entire strategy is to hide behind people, you go where the people are. If we look at the tactical or strategic other side, it makes perfect sense for Hamas to have done that. But I think if you can cut the aid, you're cutting Hamas's finances, you're cutting people's reliance on them for food and for food distribution. Now, I'm not saying Hamas distributed every gram of food that's gone into Gaza during the war. I mean, I think the most recent, most credible estimate I've seen is about 25% of aid was being diverted by Hamas.
Oh, so only 75% was getting to the people?
Yeah, exactly that. Mm-hmm. And even then, obviously, distribution problems in a war zone, that's why if there is hunger in Gaza, that's where it comes from. It's from the challenges of that distribution. Because, we know that double the aid has gone in to Gaza than went in before the war. In terms of the amount of food that's gone in. So there was no starvation before the war, and now there's twice as much going in, and yet there's starvation. So it's clearly on the distribution side that the issue is. And so it makes strategically perfectly good sense for the GHF to go in and try what they're trying. And it seems to be broadly successful. If we take away the noise around people getting shot, and we can talk about that, tens of millions of meals are getting distributed. So it seems to be a plan that works. And when you couple that with other efforts, for example, empowering rival clans in Gaza to seize areas, seize the control of those areas away from Hamas, that sort of dual strategy, I think, does separate the people from Hamas. And it's whether, I think, under the imminently proposed ceasefire, Israel has the chance to finish that job, is what will decide whether or not Hamas remains in control.
We'll come to the ceasefire, but just on then, given your military background, when you hear that the IDF, even they themselves admit that they kill people at this aid distribution, and that mistakes were made, I think, or something like that. From a military point of view, given your experience, how do you interpret that sort of information?
Again, it sounds to me, reading between the lines, and obviously I don't know categorically because I've not been there, I've not seen it, I've not seen the incident reports, so I'm not going to specify, what definitely happened. But what it sounds like to me is that they have tried to use weapons fire as a means of controlling the population. And by controlling, what I mean is, first of all, protecting themselves, the IDF, from people who would be approaching their positions. Because for context, the way it works is there's a GHF site that has contractors, armed contractors, doing the intimate local security for that, with IDF essentially oversight, a bit removed. So if you have people approaching the IDF positions, it is reasonable that you would fire warning shots to keep people back. There's normally an escalatory pathway. I haven't seen the exact IDF one in the vicinity of the GHF sites. But I have seen their procedures in Netzarim, which is originally a warning verbally, then a low warning shot, and then a kind of injury warning shot. So there is an escalatory pathway here. So that's one option that could be. Trying to keep people away from certain areas, that could be an option. Frankly, these aren't great tactics. It's not what you choose as your first option. If you had to, if you had the full menu of military tactics to choose from, that's not the one you choose. But again, if we go back to what I was saying in Rafah about the IEDs, look at the options on the table here to try and do crowd control. They can't kit up into riot gear and push forward because they'd be exposed to attacks from Hamas, IEDs, small arms fire. And just the other day, we saw hand grenades thrown into one of the GHF sites, which I think it wounded or killed 2 of the contractors that were in there. Wow. So that was just in the last couple of days. So the threat is real, and it's far too high a threat, I think, to push out full public order formations. I think the IDF accept that they didn't get their signage right, they didn't get their kind of crowd control barriers and stuff right, and they've adapted and they've changed that. Frankly, that's a very basic error to have made. I think questions do need to be asked about why that wasn't done from the offset. They must have known large crowds would come to these sites, so why were they not having at least barriers in place to sort of channel people towards the right place and make sure there's not crushing and that sort of thing? But this is a kinetic war zone, and on top of that, Hamas have every incentive to try and get the IDF to open fire. And I think that is a factor that people seem to totally ignore in this war, is that you can't look at a war and just judge one side's actions in isolation. You have to look at both sides, because war is reaction and counter-reaction. And if you're not looking at both sides here, then you're not doing an honest job of analysis. And Hamas know this will harm them. You can see by the way the disinformation storm around the GHF has rampaged up to unprecedented levels, as it always does when Hamas is under pressure. So the fact we're seeing that shows it's working in many ways. And the one thing they want to do is stop people going to those sites and keep them coming to the Hamas warehouses and the Hamas distribution sites.
Because it's their way of controlling Gazans
exactly themselves.
Okay.
And so Hamas has every incentive to draw fire. And I suspect when they do an investigation into this, they will find Hamas presence and Hamas kind of instigation of some of these incidents. And then I think the final point to note is the allegations of wildly, indiscriminately firing into crowds doesn't quite add up, because the weapon systems they're alleging the IDF are using are the big guns. We're talking mortars, we're talking tank rounds, we're talking snipers. If they were using those weapon systems, you would see hundreds of casualties a day. Even the Haaretz article said it was 1 to 5 fatalities a day. Okay, with one mortar round, you would get 1 to 5 fatalities, just one round. And if they're launching indiscriminately mortars and tank rounds and bullets in, you would see hundreds and hundreds of deaths. So that allegation doesn't make any sense to me, unless the IDF are the worst shots in the planet, which I don't think they are, having seen them in action. So there is a very skewed version of this, which is clearly incorrect. Are the IDF completely free of any blame or mistakes here? No, I don't think that's true either. So as ever, the truth will be somewhere in the middle, and you have to look at both sides before you make a final analysis.
Thanks for watching this clip from The Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode, and for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.